China is targeting India's oldest ally in the subcontinent. That ally is Bhutan, and Beijing hopes to settle a decades-long border crisis with the country. China's goal is to establish diplomatic ties with Bhutan and further undermine India's once dominant position in South Asia. So what exactly is going on? Bhutan is a country of just around 700,000 people, which is located here between India's northeast and China. Since 1949, it has arguably been India's closest economic, political and security partner in the neighbourhood. There are a few reasons why the India-Bhutan relationship is so vital to New Delhi. Over 100 years ago, British India signed a treaty with the Kingdom of Bhutan. Under this agreement, British India committed to respecting Bhutan's independence in internal affairs and safeguard its borders from external aggression. In return, Bhutan agreed to let British India have some control over its foreign policy. Britain received easier economic and military access to Tibet, which was an independent state at the time, due to this agreement with Bhutan. Now, this arrangement with Bhutan continued even after India became independent. The relationship between India and Bhutan was further strengthened by Communist China, which invaded Tibet in 1949. Tibet borders Bhutan, and this aggressive military action by China led Bhutan to fear for its own security. It didn't just end there. Throughout the 1950s, China released maps claiming Bhutan's territory, and in 1959, it annexed Bhutanese territories in Tibet. Now, this threat from China caused Bhutan to turn towards India for political and military support. India soon began to train Bhutanese soldiers, and India's military also took on more responsibility for defending Bhutan against foreign aggression. India's first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru declared that aggression against Bhutan would be seen as aggression against India. It also began funding Bhutan's economic development. All of this created the foundation of the India-Bhutan relationship as we know it today. Bhutan still follows a foreign policy that focuses largely on India as its main partner, and which also respects New Delhi's security concerns. Meanwhile, India has also continued its support for Bhutan. Over the decades, it has built thousands of kilometers of roads in Bhutan and has also helped develop hydroelectric power in the country, which the Himalayan kingdom now exports back to India. On top of that, over 70% of Bhutan's exports go to India. India's massive role in Bhutan's defense and its economy have helped set up its broader dominance in South Asia for decades. But all of that has been under challenge by China for some time now. China has made inroads into India's historic backyard in the subcontinent. It has built strong ties with Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Nepal and Myanmar. And this increased Chinese presence in the region where India was once the leading power has been a strategic headache for New Delhi. Bhutan has been the only holdout, since it has avoided establishing diplomatic ties with China. Partly this is out of self-interest, but also because of sensitivity to India's concerns about China. But that is changing. China, for its part, is pushing hard to establish ties with Bhutan. China perceives Bhutan's China policy as a byproduct of India's dominance and control. It is keen for Bhutan to shed the last signs of India's historical hegemony, writes Aditya GS of the Observer Research Foundation, a think tank. Establishing diplomatic ties with Bhutan will be a key step in expanding China's influence in South Asia and further eroding India's position. However, the other side of the equation is also worrying for India, because Bhutan also needs to draw closer to China. The tiny Himalayan country is suffering from a youth unemployment crisis, where youth unemployment stands at around 15% currently. Bhutan also wants to grow its economy to the size of $10 billion by 2030, which is an ambitious target, since the economy's size is currently about $2.5 billion. For these goals, Bhutan needs investment and trade, both of which China can provide. As a small country, Bhutan is also interested in working with China to resolve their ongoing border dispute and restore peace on its borders. China has put pressure on Bhutan in the past to resolve this issue by claiming more of its territory and even building villages and infrastructure inside Bhutan's territory. So, Bhutan and China have started to engage more. The best example of this is their ongoing talks on their decades-long border dispute, which have made rapid progress despite decades of deadlock. China claims about 495 square kilometers of territory in northern Bhutan and also claims around 269 square kilometers of territory in western Bhutan, including the vital Doklam Plateau. In 2020, it also began to claim territory in Sakteng, which is in eastern Bhutan. These talks have been ongoing since the early 1980s. But in the 1990s, China offered Bhutan a package deal. It would give up its claims in northern Bhutan in exchange for territories in Bhutan's west, including Doklam. And this was sensitive for India, since Doklam sits next to the Siliguri corridor. This narrow corridor, also known as the Chicken's Neck, connects mainland India to the northeastern states. And analysts speculate that China is interested in improving its military position against India by gaining control of Doklam. And this explains why India reacted so strongly during the 2017 Doklam border crisis, when it sent its own troops to block China's effort to improve its reach in these parts of the border. When it comes to this issue of the border dispute, Bhutan has always kept India's interests in mind when negotiating with China. It rejected China's suggestion of a package deal in the 1990s and has stated that any deal on Doklam will have to be made with India at the table. But its border talks with China have picked up pace. Both sides held their first round of boundary talks in 7 years. A border deal is expected soon, which could also lead to Bhutan establishing formal diplomatic ties with China. Bhutan's Prime Minister Lothe Tshering said in October that formal ties with China are definitely on the cards. Theoretically, how can Bhutan not have any bilateral relations with China? The question is when and in what manner, Tshering was quoted as saying. So how has India reacted to all of this? India has so far said little about the Bhutan-China border talks. Some analysts believe that Bhutan would not consider such a step forward with China without discussing the matter first with India. While India may be worried about the status of Doklam, Bhutan has made clear that no deal will be made without India. Some suggest that India has also come to accept that China is here to stay as a major power in South Asia. Instead of forcing allies like Bhutan to limit engagement with China, India's focus seems to be on providing an attractive alternative to China. India hosted the King of Bhutan twice this year, and during these visits, India announced some practical plans to expand trade and connectivity links through, for example, railway lines with Bhutan. It is also looking to invest in startups, skilling, and even the space sector to help grow Bhutan's private sector and help out with its youth unemployment crisis. This new relationship between Bhutan and China drives home the new reality that India will have to compete to retain its position as the leading power in its own strategic backyard.